Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
Regroup. Serlin now down the wing, got a man with them. That's Carabella back to Serlin, and save made by George. May have got the arm on it.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings.
As Max Plant gets it back, Plant, space, across, one-timer, and there's that shot. Cole Yzerman, what a save, Carter George.
Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. I'm Jesse Cohen. This is All the Kings Men. We're continuing our series of acquisition evaluations, and today we're talking about the Kings' second-round pick in the 2024 NHL Entry Draft, selected 57th overall, goaltender Carter George. Carter George played for the Owen Sound Attack, and I was able to speak to not only the general manager of the Attack, Dale DeGray, but also George's goalie coach in Owen Sound, Paul Gibson. We're also joined, as we will be for every draft pick episode this season, by Mark Yannetti and Chris Peters. And all of this is designed to give you the best possible view of Carter George, not only as a goaltender, but also as a prospect for your LA Kings. This episode might be the most optimistic and universally positive piece of content I have ever produced. I hope it gets you as excited as I am about this young man, so let's get started by talking about Carter George with the goaltending coach of the Owen Sound Attack, Paul Gibson. Joining me now, Paul Gibson, goaltending coach for the Owen Sound Attack. Thanks for joining me today, Paul.
Thanks a lot, Jesse, for having me.
I just want to start this off by saying I'm reasonably certain I've texted him. He hasn't texted me back yet, but I am almost positive that my dad went to Ryerson.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so it's called Toronto Metropolitan University now, so a name change, but Ryerson was great for education, and for the hockey side was excellent. So
he used to love telling me how all of the neighborhoods that are now part of the Toronto metropolitan area used to be their own cities. So I think York is the one that he always talks about, that now it's just part of Toronto. Yeah,
and you know what? Like, I'm from a couple hours outside of Toronto, so I don't have the best of knowledge, but yeah, it's like there's little pieces all over Toronto that kind of, make it all up. They refer to it as the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area.
Yes.
So
we're here to talk about Carter George today. I've had a chance to talk to Carter one-on-one for about half an hour. I have to confess every time, I just found out Glendon College, not Ryerson.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
Somebody went to Ryerson. Anyway.
Little plug for Ryerson.
Yeah. But Carter George strikes me as an incredibly sharp kid.
Highly intelligent, on and off the ice. Simple as that.
I mean, I played a clip for him, a save he made in a game, and he remembered not only the save, but he remembered that his dad had called him the night before and warned him. I think it was about Cole Yzerman's shot.
Yeah, I know exactly the one you're referring to.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So in that play, he could not only process who the shooter was, but recall the shooter's tendencies. How important is that for a goaltender, and how rare is it for a goaltender his age to be able to display that kind of quickness?
Yeah, so when I think of Carter George, when, obviously a lot of teams had reached out throughout the season, the first thing I say is Carter has a brain. Right? He's highly intelligent. He reads the game really well. He processes information very well. And, he's very deliberate in everything he does. And that obviously is super important. At a young age, he's polished over most in that aspect.
Has been a movement for years for goalies to get bigger. But I had a conversation with an individual skills coach a few years ago, and he talked about the sort of never-ending one-upsmanship between shooters and goaltenders. And he said that he thought because the equipment was getting better and sticks were getting snappier, that's my word, not his, that because shooters were going to be able to hide their release points easier, that goaltenders were going to need to start getting shorter in order to be closer to the ice to watch more subtle movements, in the players' lower bodies. Is that something that you can see happening in the future? Does height matter? I mean, Carter George is 6'1", which is not short, but it's not tall.
Yeah. So for me, it's the reason the reason there's a trajectory in goalies with height is because of the play through traffic.
Okay.
Right? It turns out to be percentages. Pucks from the point, they hit bodies, they hit sticks, right? So it's about percentages, and that's why the scouts, the teams like the height and the size. The reality is, Carter is only 6'1", but he plays a lot bigger than 6'1". The way he, not getting into the technical side too much, but he plays with high hips. He presents himself big. He presents himself a lot bigger than 6'1", in my opinion.
I like it when people go into the technical stuff that I might not understand. So what does high hips mean?
So basically it's just making sure that when he collapses into his butterfly, when he releases into his butterfly, he's keeping a little bit more of an upright position with his upper body. But at the same time, he keeps his head over top of the puck, and he just, the way he manipulates his body makes himself bigger.
In my conversation with him, we revealed that he was a huge Jonathan Quick fan. He liked his reactiveness, his athletics, his reflexes, but that he also liked Carey Price, who is a more, let's say, technically foundational goalie. Yeah. So I said, on the spectrum, where does he fit into that? So I'll ask you the same question. Where in the spectrum does he fit between those two goalies?
Well, if you could combine those two, you'd have a pretty darn good goalie.
You would.
I would say he's a little bit closer to Carey Price, just with his poise, calm and cool. But at the same time, I really believe that he has some of that Jonathan Quick in him. I believe that he can get outside of his structured game and, make desperate saves. I call them desperate. We don't like to use that word, but,
sure.
Make those types of saves when he needs to.
There was a media availability following one of the days of development camp, and I don't remember if it was Sean O'Donnell or Glenn Murray, somebody on the development staff here with the Kings, and they were asked about Carter George. And they were talking about a save he made during a scrimmage. It was a very impressive save. He sprawled out to make it. You might even call it a desperation save. Yeah. And he was asked about it after the scrimmage, according to this development staffer. And his answer was allegedly that he didn't know how he made it. He just got lucky. And that was seen as a sign of humility from him. Yeah. And was interpreted as the correct answer because it proved that he, didn't think he was capable of everything. Is that, are you looking for the same kind of answers? And does that sound like the kid you know?
No, that sounds like the kid I know. And at the end of the day, everybody's heard the line, you got to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the reality. And I think if you work at it, if you do the right things, you're going to get lucky sometimes. But I think you put the work in to do it, to have the hockey gods on your side sometimes. So
we've gone from no goaltending pipeline to a fairly stocked goaltending pipeline right now. Mark Yannetti, director of amateur scouting, spoke after the draft, talked about the differing timelines for Carter George and Hampton Slukinski. Because Slukinski's coming through the collegiate system, he might hit the AHL in 3 seasons. Because Carter George is coming through the CHL, he might hit the AHL in 2 seasons. How does he deal with competition for the crease?
Well, I think you saw it this past year. He's a 17-year-old that came in, wasn't expected to play 56 games, and he kind of won the crease, week or 2 into the season, just based on, his work ethic, doing the right things, being a good teammate, and then you mix that with what he was doing on the ice, right? So I think he just covers all aspects. So in terms of competition, I think anything he views his goalie partner, I know Corbin, his goalie partner, was one of his biggest advocates on the team. They had a great relationship. So I think he views it as an internal competition, and obviously he doesn't veer away from that thing. He's very cerebral in everything that he does. So yeah, in terms of competition, I think he thrives on it, to be honest.
If we travel, let's just say 10 years into the future, and I tell you, Carter George, member of the LA Kings, He's on the roster every day, travels, he's not up and down. He's firmly planted within the LA Kings organization. And then I ask you, how long do you think it took him to get there? What's your guess?
That's a loaded question, Jesse.
Yes, it is.
You know what? I think with the way that this athlete had, with his mindset, with his work ethic, I think he might surprise some people and be there sooner than he thinks, or sooner than people think. I really do believe that. Is it going to take time? Do goalies take longer than players? Absolutely. And we all understand that. So in terms of, I don't want to put a number of years on it, but I think that he could get there sooner than people think, just the way he plays and his mindset.
I'll let you go on this one. If you were talking to another goalie coach or someone who knew goaltending obviously way more than I do, what would you say Carter George's biggest strength is just within the world of goaltending? If you were talking to somebody who knew exactly what you meant, even though I'm not going to.
I'll name a few, because he has a lot of things that you can't teach. And number one is the brain, and number two is the poise. He's unflappable, right? Nothing phases him. So those are two things that I believe kind of set him apart from others. Things that can't be taught that he has.
Well, listen, Paul, we appreciate your time today, and hopefully we will get a chance to talk to you soon as Carter George embarks on his LA Kings career.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thanks for your time.
Joining me today, former LA King and general manager of the Owen Sound Attack, Dale DeGray. How are you doing today, Dale?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. We're here to talk about Carter George. I had a chance to sit down with Carter for about half an hour at development camp, and one of my first questions to him was, how often does Dale DeGray mention the fact that he used to play for the LA Kings? He said it comes up once in a while.
Not very often. Yeah, I don't. I'm one of those guys where, sometimes you have to use it, but I hate saying, back when I played, because quite honestly, back when I played, these kids were nowhere near being born, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, for those who don't know, Dale DeGray played for the 1988-89 Kings. Fairly eventful season for the LA Kings.
Yes. Yeah, it was a pretty big season, to be quite honest with you, with the introduction to some guy named Wayne Gretzky to the LA Kings organization. It was pretty special.
I'm sure it was. I do want to talk about Carter George. I was looking up as many sort of interviews that feature both your name and Carter George's name. So I want to read you one of your quotes about Carter George and have you comment it, if we could.
Yeah, no problem.
This was after he won
I hope it was good.
It was great. It was after he won the Bobby Smith and the Ivan Tennant Award.
Ivan Tennant, yes.
So the quote is, Carter George is one of those young men capable of just about anything he puts his mind to. I don't think anyone in the organization is surprised that he has achieved this feat. Carter has proven to be a leader, both on and off the ice, since completing his first game with us 2 years ago. I want to hone in on that leadership aspect. How does a goaltender, especially a young goaltender in the OHL, exhibit leadership?
Well, let me put it to you this way. When he played, trying to think, it was his first league game, and we were in Barrie, and he was put in. We were down. I'm going to say we were down 6-1. He comes in, and the game is 6-6. Okay. And we go. So we come back. It's 6-6. We go into overtime, and it stayed tied 6-6. We go into a shootout. He comes back to the bench, and he says to the guys, don't worry about this. I got it. And we won 7-6 in a shootout. That's just, and that has nothing to do with him being cocky. It just has all to do with him knowing who he is and what he's capable of. And like I said, that was one of the first games he had ever played for us. And he has since done the same thing where maybe a team scored a couple of late goals and we went into overtime, and he's come back to the bench and he said, guys, this is on me. This is on me. We'll get the next goal. They're not scoring anymore. And that's the sort of the type of kid that he is. Like I said, he's not cocky. He's just confident in his abilities. And just by the way that he plays post to post, seldom gives up rebounds, and really battles his butt off to make each save and the rebound. And I think everybody on the bench has come accustomed since day one with him to realize that, they're in good hands. They're sitting on the bench, and, if they score, hey, it's just a goal. It's not that goal that he's worrying about. He's worrying about the next shot, and that's how he plays.
It's impossible. Well, I don't know about impossible, but it's difficult to predict what an 18-year-old is going to be like when he's 22, 25, 30, whatever. I would imagine it's even harder to predict what a 15 or 16-year-old is going to be like over the next 5 years of his life. When did you first get a sense that Carter George was a player you wanted in your organization?
I can tell you, January of his draft year, I moved him to the number one goalie in the draft. And he was somebody that we wanted. We tried to figure out where we might be able to get him. And quite honestly, I think there were 6 or 7 goalies taken in the draft before him. We lucked out. He was without hesitation, I can tell you, he was our number one rated goalie. And we got him, I think, 6th overall as far as goaltenders go. And that might be luck on our part and maybe some poor judgment on the other teams. I don't know. There's some good goalies in the league, but he's obviously proven to be a top rated goalie for his age group.
I don't remember where I read it, and I'm going to paraphrase a little, but there was a review of his performance in one of the international tournaments that essentially said he was worth the price of admission from an entertainment standpoint. Does that sound right?
Well, he is definitely that. It's just, you know what? I don't. It's hard for me to sit here and say he's a really exciting goalie to watch, because I find him to be very quiet in his movements. He challenges. He plays the puck. Actually, at international competition, he plays the puck way less than he does in our league. And playing the puck is a strong point of his. He's got tremendous confidence with the puck. But I do remember it in the U17s. I remember the U17s, Dave Reed was commentating, and he was the backup goalie. I can't remember the goalie's name who started the U17 tournament for Canada, but I remember I texted Dave Reed, he was asking me about Carter, and I told Dave, I said, if by chance the number one goalie fails and they give Carter a chance, he will not give the net up. And that's exactly what he did. He ended up going like the next 5 games in a row and didn't give it up. And then he went to the 18s, and other than the one game that they let the other goalie play, it was the Carter George show.
If I remember correctly, he was listed as first in the league in stretch passes by a goalie. And I asked him about that, asked him if he'd ever scored a goalie goal. I think he said he was 0 for 7. Asked him if that was going to stop him from trying in the future. He said absolutely not.
He will. I promise you this. He will get a goal before he leaves junior hockey.
Wow, okay. All right. I like that.
I have no doubt.
Is that freedom to try those passes, to get those stretch passes, is that something that other organizations might try and discourage, or is that just he is who he is and he's going to do what he's going to do?
Well, I think nowadays, I think coaches have to let kids, play to their strengths. And as coaches, as a manager, or being even old school, I've got to sort of roll with the times. And if playing the puck is part of his game and he's confident and does a great job, I don't think anybody's going to tell him to hold back and knock it off, because he is capable of letting his teammates get in on breakaways and create 2-on-1s, because other teams are pushing the pace on the forecheck, and he can beat it with a pass.
I had this conversation with Paul Gibson earlier about Carter George, talked to a couple other people about a couple other prospects. And I said, I forget, once a year I do these conversations with the prospects, and I tend to forget that they're 18 and I'm talking to them as if they're 50s, 50 or 60, and they're reflecting back on a career, but they're kids. And but Carter George, in the brief conversation I had with him and in everything I've, heard from people that I've spoken to about him, just unbelievably sharp kid. Yeah.
He is, he's done a great job both on the ice and off the ice with school. He's very mature. He understands what it takes. He's mature beyond his years, but he's still an 18-year-old. Like, you can still talk to him and go, okay, yeah, you are still 18, right? Sure. But he's mature. He gets it. He has a real good understanding of what it's probably going to take to become an NHL goalie. And he's going to do everything he can to fulfill that.
So you were willing to predict that he'd make a goalie goal by the end of his junior career. So I'll ask you the same question I asked Paul Gibson. It's not really a fair question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If you and I spoke 10 years from now, and I told you 10 years from now that Carter George absolutely was an NHL goaltender, what would the path be, you think, to him getting there, and how long might it take him?
Well, I mean, I've always think that goaltending is the most important position on any team. And if you have a rock solid goaltender, you can have deficiencies in any other position, and that guy can still steal you games. So I believe that because of that, it takes a little bit longer to become the goalie that I think he could be. I've always hear, his size. He's basically 6'1", and I don't know. The number one goalie for the New York Rangers is the exact same size, and I would like to think that if the Rangers put him up for trade or on the waiver wire, you might have 31 teams try to get him. And if that's who Carter's going to emulate and he's going to try to strive to become, it's going to take him a little bit longer because of his size, just to prove to people he can play. But I would bet you by 22, he's already playing National Hockey League games.
Wow. Well, that's what we like to hear. Dale DeGray, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us today, Director of Amateur Scouting, Mark Yannetti. How are you doing today, Mark?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Excellent. And featuring Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
Jesse, I'm doing excellent.
We're here today to talk about Carter George. And Mark, I got to tell you, I've had a chance to sit down with Carter now for about half an hour. I've spoken to his goalie coach at the Owen Sound Attack. I talked to Dale DeGray from the Owen Sound Attack. I could not be higher on this kid just from a personal level. So I'm going to ask you to lean as absolutely positive as you possibly can. Before we get into specifics about him, we talked to you about the decision to trade down when we talked about Liam Greentree. I want to kind of revisit that conversation and just ask, did you know when you made that trade that Carter George was a possibility? Like, was Carter George part of the motivation to make that trade, or was he just part of the tier system? Was it, once you made the trade, you looked at it and you said, aha, we have a chance to get this goalie, we'll go with that route?
He was one of the guys that we had in our minds that could potentially be there at 57. There were three players that we had. There were three players, and we had high, and when I say high confidence on Greentree at 26, like, as I said, there wasn't a scenario that presented itself. We couldn't say that high, but we made the trade with this player and two other players. They were in three different tiers or two different tiers. I think it was two different tiers and three players that we moved back, hoping, more than hoping, thinking one of the guys would be there. I'd say the draft models predicted that, again, the draft models, we can never go wrong with the draft models. The draft models predicted something like 90% or 87% that one of the three players would be there. We had a good level of confidence at one of the three. And if you had polled our scouts, George would have been one of the two that they really wanted to draft. So definitely, he was definitely in our minds when we made the trade.
So if I'm looking at the strengths and the under construction bullet points on Carter George from the Hockey Writers, size appears in, I think, 5 of the 6 different bullet points, positives and negatives. So before we get into those, does it matter how tall a goalie is in 2024? I know we had the trend of getting bigger. Are we moving away from that?
No. As I said, well, I mean, it depends what you read. Like, everybody, even Billy on our staff wanted us to draft a big goalie. The problem is he watched Carter George play. I'm just saying, I'm saying, Billy is not predisposed to liking goalies under 6'3". He could. I guess if there was an elite guy at 6'2", he could have a soft spot for him. But in terms of going in, going in and building a goalie, he would be 6'2" or bigger, and he would probably be bigger than he'd probably be closer to 6'3" than 6'2" when Billy's building his ideal goalie. Billy was Billy's not predisposed to like a guy like George, and I had to stop him from drafting George after the first game he watched. I'm like, Billy, you got to wait till June. He was, as I said, we were at the World, the under-18 February tournament in Plymouth, and we would watch one game. Chris Byrne and I would watch one game during the day, and then we'd go to an OHL game at night. So at this time, Bill and Ron Pyatt and Brian Denny came with us. So we had a pretty big contingent going to watch this guy. And I think Billy sat with all 4 of us at one time, just saying, this is the guy we got to draft. This is the guy we got to draft. So he was, as I said, there's only, I don't know what you can hit me with the under construction and the negatives are. There's only one negative in this kid, and the one negative on him is his size, and he's almost 6'1". I think he measured in at the combine at 6 feet. And 3/4 of an inch. He doesn't look like he's done growing. So let's say he's a 6'1" guy. I mean, Quickie wasn't 6'2". I know what you guys can read anything you want. I mean, we've all stood next to him. I'm just saying the program's height and the other guy's height. And then you look at George play. There's size in his presentation, right? So a 6'3" guy can be big but present smaller, and a 6'1" guy can be smaller and present big. Like if you look at George, he presents bigger than his size. If you look at Saros, I'm not saying George is going to be Saros. It's just an easy comp. If you look at Saros, he presents bigger than his size. If you look at Wolf, he's learning that. He doesn't present bigger than his size, but if you look at him, he presents really well. And each step of the way, Wolf has gotten better at that. So if you're a smaller goalie, presentation is key, among other things. And then, as I said, if you watch George, he just, it's like an animal puffing himself out, like one of those puffer fishes. You look at him and, you look at him in his Under Armour gear, and the puffer fish is small, and then all of a sudden you throw pads and an Owen Sound shirt on him and puffs out, and he looks bigger than he is. So the size for George is mitigated by the presentation, but he's still undersized by today's standards. However, I don't have it in front of me, but how many goalies over 6'3" is it Vasilevsky? And is he really, how many big guys? Like no one's 6'4", only a couple guys 6'3", and the rest of them 6'2" or smaller to win cups. So,
well, he told me that he models himself after Shesterkin, who I believe is 6'2".
Yeah, that's fair. There's some similarities in their play. I think Shesterkin is bigger, and I think Shesterkin does present bigger. But Shesterkin's also 4 years older than he is, 5 years older than he is. So, George is going to fill out a little that way. I mean, does George get to 6'1"? Probably. Does he get to 6'1.25"? Maybe. That's a big difference. It's a half an inch of coverage. But he, as I said, he has some similarities to the styles Shesterkin plays. He might as well compare himself to the best guy in the league, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Not a bad thing to do. I'm going to call him the Mountain Lion because he looks like he's making himself look big to scare off a mountain lion. There's the new nickname.
Fair enough.
With Liam Greentree, when we recently spoke about him, you mentioned how he would get tired because he was overworked in the role he was in. Carter George was the most peppered goalie in the OHL this year. Is that anything that you take into context for a goalie like you did for Greentree?
Oh, we took it into context in a different way. The amount of shots he faced was, as I said, it was more than any goalie. However, you got to break it down. So the game this actually leads right into the game. The first time Billy saw him live with the four of us was against Saginaw, who won the Memorial Cup. They were under siege the whole night, and he had a lot of shots. I can't remember exactly, but let's say I bet he had 45 shots in an overtime game. He might have faced 28 or 29 grade A scoring chances. If you face 10 to 13 grade A scoring chances in a game, that's a lot. And he was closer to 30. So he gave up 4 goals in that game. And you're like, well, 4 goals in a game isn't really impressive. Well, when close to 30 of the shots are high level scoring chances, it takes on a different, you view it differently. Hopefully you view it differently. We do, certainly. So, he not only faced the most shots in that league, he faced the highest, the highest quality as well. And, one of the things when you talk about, Liam getting tired, I didn't see George get tired much. His style, he's very smart. He reads the game extremely well. The third or fourth, or maybe even the fifth thing you notice about George is his athletic ability and explosion. Because the first thing you notice is his presentation, because you're looking for him to be small. The second thing you notice about him is he's got a really high hockey IQ, which is what we look for, in one of the things I look for in a position player. So I think it's equally important in the net. It's what differentiated Hasek or Quick from other athletic goalies that were viewed as out of control. It was the hockey sense that separated those guys from the other ones. But with George, he's the third thing you notice is his positioning. He's always in the right spot, so he doesn't make extra work for himself. So there's an economy to his style where his athleticism he relies on his position first and athleticism second, where a lot of goalies today rely on athleticism first and position second. So it's not something that comes out as obviously or overtly, but it comes out when he has to make a big save. It comes out when someone does find the back door, when there is a defensive breakdown and he has to get from one side of the net to the other, or he's already down making a save and he's got to find a way to change his momentum, go back against the grain. He's got excellent skating. His edges are good. He gets good bite in his edges so he can get back against the grain, and he's never out of it in terms of he might look prone, but he's never out of it. He always gives himself a chance to make the second or even the third save.
I'm going to read a quote to you about Carter George, then I'm going to tell a little story that I heard. I can't remember if it was Paul Gibson or Dale DeGray. Apologies to Paul and Dale. But here's the quote. George's game is mature beyond his years. His ability to track and anticipate play, along with excellent movement selection and mostly perfect positioning, allow George to consistently keep the play in front of him. On the very rare occasion that he finds himself out of position, he has the athletic ability to recover, though he's listed at only 6'1", only in quotes. His relatively upright and compact stance allow him to fill more of the net than his counterparts of similar size. Sounds like that's exactly what you just said. The story that I loved was that apparently he was in a game. I think they had allowed 6 goals. They wound up scoring 5 more to tie the game 6-6. And in overtime, evidently, he went to his teammates and said, "I'm not allowing another one. Don't worry about it." And I guess that's a sort of a typical move on his part to just say, like, this is it. I'm done. The door is closed. That kind of confidence, that kind of maturity. I mean, that's what I was struck when I spoke to him, is that he's clearly an intelligent kid. And I don't know if that goes to hockey IQ or real IQ, but I mean, how much of that personality came through for you guys, and how much of a role did that play in selecting him?
A big role. I mean, obviously the evaluation is the important, the on-ice evaluation is the bulk of the evaluation. But no, I mean, he's a culture kid, and it's hard to be a culture kid in net without having an it factor, and it's really hard to find an it factor. It's just, as I said, there's 32 goal positions in the NHL, and there might be 6, if you're really generous, 8 it factor goalies. I don't know that there are that many.
Mark, can I jump in and ask you a real quick question?
Sure.
How many culture goalies can you think of off the top of your head?
Well, it's easy for me. Hey, I'll give the guy credit. Al Murray drafted one. He helped us win a cup. So Quickie's the obvious answer.
That's one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Right.
No, he is. But I mean, well, let's go back not old school, but you go back at the beginning of the new era of hockey. You got Tim Thomas was an it factor goalie. He's an it factor in a whole lot of areas. But in terms of, guys thought they could get one goal and win the game. Quickie's the obvious one for us because we saw him win 3 Game 7s on the road, and that I don't think that's ever happened. He came back from 3-0 in that same playoff series. That's never happened. All 3 Game 7s and coming back from 3-0. So it's an easy it factor to do. You'd have to say Vasilevsky has it. Saros has shown it. Shesterkin has shown it. I don't know. Hellebuck has it in flashes. Hasn't quite put it together yet, but that was the same thing they said about Hickey. About Quickie before he put it together. So, as I said, there's not a lot of goalies that have that it factor. This kid showed it in multiple places. As I said, not diminishing it, but it's easy to show it in a 6-6 game in Owen Sound. It's much harder. It's much harder to show. Again, I said this, and I have fun with our guys. Canada was the 3rd or 4th best team in the world this year. Guys, it's over. The U.S. is better. And I love saying that to our guys. Canada won the U18 for one reason and one reason only. And, credit to them for fighting back. But that game could have been 6 or 7-2. And then there's no fighting back. I forget if it was the game against Sweden or there was a game in the quarters of the, same thing. They didn't deserve 2 of the games they won in the gold medal round. And the reason they won was the goalie pulling them out of it. So, but again, you need that. You could say that at every Stanley Cup champion. If Bobrovsky doesn't stone him in that first game, and Edmonton's rolling, things change. You go back to Quickie. We could have won with a street hockey goalie in that the second and third round of that first Stanley Cup. Our team was that good and rolling that much. But those first 2 rounds without Quickie, our guys don't believe it. So he did that for them in that Canada tournament, in that U18 tournament over in Finland. And that matters. I think those tournaments are overblown, but in terms of a goalie, maybe not. He wasn't expected to win during the year, and it's really easy I shouldn't say easy. It's easier to perform at a high level without the pressure of having to win. Grant Fuhrer won. It didn't matter if it was 7-3, 7-6, 5-1, 1-0. Grant Fuhrer won. George didn't have to win in Owen Sound. It was a great. Oh my God! Did you see George? They lost 5-4 in overtime. How good was it? Wow! I know he let in 3 goals, but he had 39 shots. You see how good George? You can't do that in Canada. You can't do that in the World 18. You can't do it with the World Juniors. You can't do it in the Stanley Cup. Those are the tournaments that you have to win. And Canada goes there and they have to win. If Canada comes back with a silver, the whole again, they actually their nation actually watches the U18. I'm serious. It doesn't. You don't hear people talking about the U18 in a coffee shop in Boston. But you certainly do in Canada. So there's tangible pressure, and that team has to win. And more often than not, they win. I thought, and our staff thought that it was greatly influenced. And again, credit to their guys. They had a lot of high level guys there that helped them win. But the deciding factor, in my opinion, was the goal.
Final thought about Carter George. When he was drafted, I went back, I watched the telecast for all the Kings picks just to see what everyone was talking about. They threw up a stats package on the screen, and he was listed as first in stretch passes amongst OHL goalies. I talked to him about it. He said he compared himself to yet another great goaltender. Actually, I did, Marty Brodeur. As far as being the third defenseman back there, he used the phrase third defenseman. So I asked him if he'd ever scored a goalie goal, if he's so good at threading the puck up the ice. And he said not yet. I think he said he was 0 for 7. I asked him if that was going to stop him in the future. He said absolutely not. And then Dale DeGray guaranteed me that he'd score a goal in the OHL before his time was done. How much does that element of his game stand out to you guys? Does it even matter? And how did you see that in your scouting of him?
Well, scoring a goal doesn't matter to us at all.
Sure.
The puck handling. The puck handling is a part of our evaluation. It's on the lower scale. Obviously you want a kid who can stop the puck. But if the kid can stop the puck and he can handle, I'll steer clear of Marty Brodeur just because he was
Sure.
the best to ever do it. If 20 years from now, George has 3 or 4 Stanley Cups and, makes them change the game by putting a trapezoid behind the net, then we can talk about it that way, and put it in more significance. But it's a good tool. It will help. It helps his defense at this level. It helps his defense in the international play where it's a little harder to get out of the net because it's bigger. And it helps it in when he's playing in the CHL. It's a really good tool to have. And again, it goes to the hockey IQ as well as a skill element. Now he's blending the two because, a lot of goalies can get out there quick and just fire it back up the boards or put it back into traffic or turn it back into a 50-50 puck. He usually, if he goes back for the puck, it usually ends up in, offensive transition, defensive transition out of the defensive zone. So it's a very good thing. The less time we spend in our D zone, the better we're going to be. And the more time we spend in the offensive zone, the better we're going to be. So if he can help the D or help get the pucks up quickly, it's certainly a benefit.
Mark Yannetti, appreciate your time and insight as always. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Joining us today, NHL draft expert from Flow Hockey, Chris Peters. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great, Jesse. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
And featuring Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
Jesse, I appreciate the intro here on the second round selection of the LA Kings.
I forgot to introduce Zach when we talked about Liam Greentree. So today we're talking about Carter George. And Chris, I have fallen prey to falling in love with one prospect a year, sometimes for no reason at all, sometimes for, the reason of having been exposed to the kid and talking to them. Carter George's case, it's just from sitting down and talking to him for half an hour. I love this kid. I can't explain it. I'm rooting for this kid all the way. I'm convinced he's incredible. Thoughts on Carter George and on drafting a goalie in the second round?
Yeah. So interestingly, he's a player that I was at the World Under-18 Championship, spoke to Carter a couple of times, and I came away particularly struck by his thoughtfulness and his approach. And I think that he is a fascinating prospect for those reasons. I think the interesting thing is I did not expect goalies to go very high in this draft. And then the run on goalies started in the second round. More goalies were selected than I anticipated would be selected. And a lot of them were picked a lot higher than I thought they would be. And Carter George is one of those players. He, picked much higher than I expected to see him go. And there's a reason for that because yes, he had a good season. Yes, he has a under-18 gold medal. Yes, he has tremendous character and hockey sense and confidence and, the body language, all those things that you look for in a goalie. But what he doesn't necessarily have is that NHL size. Now, he's not small. He's 6'1", about 200 pounds, closing in on that. So, and obviously the LA Kings won 2 Stanley Cups with a 6'1" goaltender. So, it's not like we're, I think that players like him can absolutely make it. It's the guys that are maybe like 5'10" that will have a much harder time unless they're UC Saros crazy. So the thing about George is, I was a little bit surprised that he went as high as he did, but I think that a lot of teams liked him. I thought he interviewed really well at the Combine. I've heard a lot of very positive things. I think he impressed a lot of people at the Under-18 World Championship where he led Canada to a gold medal, basically had that. I think a lot of people looked at Ryerson Leanders going into the season as a higher end prospect for the draft. Yet, it was always Carter George's net the whole way. And he had a really strong game. Now, I will also say in those last 2 games of the Under-18 World Championship, he gave up 4 goals in each of the last 2 games, which normally, not great for those semifinal and final games. They did play Sweden and USA. His team scored more goals than the other team, so it didn't really matter in the end. But he had a so-so Holinka Gretzky Cup. You look at most OHL and junior hockey goalies, they're not going to have that gaudy save percentage, which he did not. But he played well enough, and so I think he's going to be an intriguing prospect. I mean, obviously the Kings have a lot of belief in him. They've already signed him, which is, drafting him in the second round, signing him to a contract. This is a player that they clearly wanted badly, and they got him. And sometimes you do have to draft higher to get the players that you really, really want. I think so. Would it have been the move that I made in the draft? Probably not, just because I think that the percentages for goalies and the probabilities for goalies are so difficult, especially goalies that don't have that prototypical NHL size. It would have been a hard sell for me to get on board with that. However, clearly, just for the reasons that I just mentioned, this is a team and a player that clearly were a match, and that led them down this path.
So Chris, when I play fantasy football, goalies in the NHL draft feel like quarterbacks in fantasy football, where they always seem to go higher than the ranking says they should, because you don't want to miss the run. Because if you miss the run, then you're stuck with like Kirk Cousins. Kind of like Kirk Cousins, but he's vanilla. Is that kind of similar? Like Carter George, Scott Wheeler said the same thing when we talked about him with him before the draft. He said probably doesn't see a goalie in the second round, but then a goalie goes, and then the Kings take George second. Is that kind of similar, where like goalies sometimes defy the rankings just because it's such a niche position?
I think so. And I think, again, I still remain shocked by this year's run of goalies. I mean, you look at it, in the end, we had 5 goalies taken in the second round. In a year where we're like, this is a bad year for goalies. This is not a year where you want to be. If you're looking for a goalie, you don't want to find one. You don't want to get one. And they get them, and actually it was also a year where a lot of the goalies were below average in size, because Ilya Nabokov, who was the first goalie picked, also 6'1" or 6 foot. And then there were a couple that were huge, and I was like, well, those guys will obviously go, because that's how the NHL works. But I think it was something like 24 goalies and 25 goalies in the end were selected. And Carter George absolutely, in my mind, was among the higher tier of the goalies that were available. I think because of the proliferation of the Russian goalies in the NHL, and also because of the fact that they're getting more playing time at younger ages in Russia, so we're seeing that. We are seeing fewer CHL Canadian goalies, kind of in this situation that Carter George finds himself in. But again, I think, if it were me pick, I think on my list, I believe my first goalie wasn't on there until like 60th. So that would have been, right in the end of the second round, but here we had 5. So, I'm still trying to unpack that one, Zach, honestly, because it's like, I still don't get it, why it was so prominent. But I do think that that's exactly what happened, that there was basically the run started. And, there's usually a run on defensemen. The goalie run typically does happen in the second or the third round. And this year it was absolutely in the second round.
I was watching The Big Short again recently, and they had one of their little cut scenes where they were trying to explain the financial terms, and they were talking about CDOs and synthetic CDOs, and they go to, I can't remember his name, but an economist, and I think Selena Gomez at the blackjack table, and they talk about the hot hand fallacy. And the hot hand fallacy being that because everything has gone a certain way recently, you expect it to just continue happening that way. Goaltenders can't keep getting taller and taller and taller and taller. And, you referenced Jonathan Quick being 6'1". I think Bobrovsky's 6'2". Yeah. And just won the cup last season. And I trying not to reference this conversation a bajillion times, but I think within the last few years, I spoke to Pete Russo, a skills coach, who talked about, as shooters develop new skills and as stick flexibility increases and players are being able to bring the puck closer to the body to hide release points, goaltenders are actually going to have to become shorter in order to see, closer to ice level. That, the benefit from blocking more physical space with their size will be overcome by the benefit for tracking puck movement close to players' bodies. So, I mean, how important, you mentioned a bunch of shorter goalies, not again, shorter, they're all taller than I am. But you referenced the fact that goaltenders have been getting shorter, at least in this draft. You're like, how much stock do we actually put in the need for a goaltender to be 6'4", 6'5", 10 years from now when the game might continue to change?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think it is going to change. I think it's going to continue that will simply because it is all about taking away as much of the net as possible naturally. That's the thing. And they're still going to have superior, to be an NHL goaltender, they still have to have superior athleticism, superior hockey sense, elite skating ability, the ability to recover that high-end competitiveness. And I think that those are things that Carter George, he brings some of those things. He has great hockey sense. He's a good skater. He's got, composure, and he competes and he fights and he takes away the space that he can. But I think because of the precision shooters, because of the way that guys are hiding, there are some places shorter goalies simply cannot cover. Most of them that are 6'2" or taller can cover those spaces for the most part. But you're also seeing a proliferation of goalies with high-end technique. I think some goalie coaches will debate what's better. Should we have a guy that has more feel or a guy that has more technique? And I think it can go both ways. There's a lot of different goalies that go a lot of different ways. But, I think that George is one of those guys who has a little bit of both, where he has that technique down and then he also has that feel for the game. And I thought that was really evident in the gold medal game against Team USA because they had a lot of elite shooters. They had a lot of guys that could get pucks to the net. They moved the puck across the crease an awful lot. And, I think he stopped a couple of breakaways. He stopped, a couple side-to-side, kind of things. And you're just like, okay, he made big saves when he had to make them. Yes, he gave up 4 goals, but he made big saves when he had to make them. And basically, once Canada got the lead, he shut it down. And so those are all things that I think will be interesting. Like, and I think that's an interesting point from Peter as well, just in terms of the different things that, the way that shooters are working now, and certainly hockey sense will continue to be a big thing. But I still think, based on, the people that I talk to, in the goaltending side of things, and because obviously I'm not a goalie expert, I'm kind of, cribbing notes from those that are. And
I don't believe in goalie experts. I don't think.
Well, that's the thing, is they are voodoo. And I think that, I still think that there's going to be that emphasis on those bigger guys just because they just naturally do take up so much space. And if you're talking about probabilities, who's probably going to stop more goals, it's usually going to be the bigger goaltender.
When I grew up, I was a Yankees fan, I still am, and I always thought of Andy Pettitte as a big game pitcher. He didn't have the best stuff, didn't throw the hardest, but in the playoffs, whether he gave up 1 run or 4, he gave up fewer runs than the other team and he won the games. Is there anything, I know you're not a goalie expert, to the notion of being like a big game goalie, of he maybe had that it factor? He won those big games at the Holinka and at the U18s, even if, like you said, it was a night when he gave up 4 goals.
Yeah, I don't get that sense, honestly, from him. Like, because I don't think in either of those games I thought, like, in the USA game, I felt like, yeah, he was a massive reason that they won the game. I do think that he has the mentality and the approach and the mental strength to excel in those situations. I do think that, and I think that the goalies that can do that do exist. I think it's really hard for them to do it consistently. And really, honestly, I mean, like, that's the thing, is we watch goalies ebb and flow all the time. The very best goalies in the NHL have seasons where they don't look anything close to a Vezina contender, and then they're, Sergei Bobrovsky is certainly a great example of that kind of player, where it's like, I don't know, but then all of a sudden he was all world, when it mattered. And so, I think, like pitchers, like quarterbacks, the goaltender needs to have a certain level of mentality. And I do think it impacts the entire team when a goalie has a certain level of mentality. And that's what I think Carter George actually does bring, is there's a presence to him. And Jesse, you saw it when you talked to him. You saw there is a presence, and he's present. He's present in that moment, and he doesn't think about anything else except what's going on in that moment. And I do think that matters. And so I'm very impressed by that with him. The question is going to be, as you know, you look at the totality of his career at this point, and it's still hard to say what he's going to be, like, is he going to be a starting goalie at the NHL level? There are so many things that have to happen right for that to happen, which is the same for every single goalie drafted. How many guys that get drafted in the first round don't play? It's happened plenty of times. It's why we don't see many, if any, goalies going in the first round anymore. But the thing is that he has that foundation with the hockey sense, with the personality, with the mentality, that I think that does give you something to work with. And so that's the thing that I find really interesting about him. I think that's probably what put the Kings on the path to.
Careful there.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that was close. That was close. I was looking at Owen Sound Attack on my computer, which is the team that he played for. I'm like, Shark Attack. But anyway, the Kings, for them to sign him, to draft him in the second round, they feel that there's something there. It's just going to be up to him to be patient, for the Kings to be patient, for the fans to be patient. The goalies are going to work out.
Last thing on Carter George, I have always hated the trapezoid rule. And,
me too.
And I will hate it even more if Carter George does wind up working out, because one of his skills is apparently stretch passes to his defenseman. And if they take that away from him at the NHL level, I will be massively upset. How much of an offensive impact goes into realistically scouting a goaltender?
I think it's probably last on my list of things that I care about. It helps. It helps a guy. I've watched some goalies that have been superior puck handlers. I don't think it significantly enhances their value, especially with the trapezoid. Now it's that's a nice skill to have for maybe you get a chance to shoot at the empty net every now and again.
Hey, he says he'll do it, and if I remember correctly, Dale DeGray, GM of the Owen Sound Attack, swore to me that he would have one before his OHL career is done.
He probably will, and I mean, it is it's so fun. It's a cool thing. It's a cool skill to have. When a goalie can handle the puck well, I do think it matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It's just on the priority list, it's super low. But at the same time, he's, he'll provide that entertainment value one way or another.
Well, one of the reviews I read of him said that he was worth the price of admission. So hopefully that'll continue. Chris Peters, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.